I'm going to start this, and then I've got Jason Ellison on board here. He's going to speak to us in just about 5 minutes. He's going to speak to us on this myth, and that is cement returns to surface. And I will just say this part before I hand it over. When you see on the morning report that you have 5 barrels of cement returns, you had no cement returns. That is 5 barrels back is a myth. I'm also concerned when it's a small amount of contaminated cement. Sometimes we've gotten a lot of contaminated cement when there was no cement at all. So I will ask you this. When you get cement returns to surface, one way that we know that is true is by its appearance. You may see a viscosity change. There are professionals who can smell the cement. They can see it, they can smell it. It may have dye in it, or it may have materials in it where you can see it. When we are cementing deep water, we know when we get cement to the ocean floor because we have dye. We have some other things, both deep water and on land too. What else? How else do we know that we have cement returns to surface? You look at it or you smell it. Got some funny stories about smelling and looking at cement. Okay, we're showing phenolphthalein and also pH, which is kind of one and the same. So we will look at the pH. We can use it. We have pH meters in deep water or subsea, or we can have it even on land, but we'll stick the pH meter into the stream. Or we'll run phenolphthalein. Be careful, muds have high pH too, or can. Exactly. Someone just mentioned that. Slurry weight, the density. If I'm going to a job, I'm going to measure the density. And we will see the density. Sometimes we think we have cement and the density is barely above the drilling fluid. And then finally, the ultimate. When it's all said and done, we'll find out if we have cement there, regardless of what was stated. And even if we have cement, it may fall back, but we'll have the bond. So do we get returns to surface, and how can we help? And I wanted to bring Jason in. He's the CEO of Ellison Fluid Calipers, and he's going to talk to us. Well, I drink a little coffee, and I'm giving him about 10 minutes to do his thing. If I can find you, Jason.
Can you hear me, Kurt?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I appreciate the time, Kurt. Is Kurt? Go ahead, Kurt.
No, go ahead.
As Kurt said, I'm the CEO of Ellison Fluid Calipers, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this myth that Kirk is talking about always getting cement to surface. Go ahead to the next slide, Kurt. So in that myth of always getting cement returns to surface, how many times have everybody heard this kind of stuff in the field that, well, I always circulate cement, or I never have problems with my volumes, or like Kurt said, we only get 5 barrels back surface, or we hear this a lot. I always circulate exactly 100 sacks every time. These are definitely myths. Or my top of cement is always where it needs to be. It's always 500 feet into the previous casing string every time, all the time. And then when you ask, well, what about that one time that it wasn't? Oh, don't worry about that one time. That was a one-off. How many times have you heard one-off in the oil field? Well, after multiple times, it's no longer a one-off. So we need to really look at what is the issue here, right? With all of these other things that Kirk's talking about are very complex and complicated things. Getting the proper volume is probably one of the easier things of all of this. And if you don't get the proper volume, then a lot of these other things don't really matter. You know, why not just tack the bottom and call it a day if you're not going to properly circulate cement every time? Go ahead. So why do we get this? Why do we get these morning reports that say we circulated 5 barrels? Well, part of it is lack of proper oversight by management or a regulatory body, if you have one. In general, people don't want to get in trouble. They want to say, hey, we didn't circulate cement, right? And if you don't have someone looking over your shoulder or double checking, then you know, that seems to be a common theme. Without proper oversight in humans, unfortunately, it breeds laziness. And when you have laziness, what happens? You know, you probably heard this. We always pump the same amount. You know, I always pump 100% over gauge hole, or 50%, or 20% in the production, or whatever it is, right? But you're always pumping the same amount on from hole to hole without really any thought of why. Sometimes people use offset wellbore data as a baseline, which that's actually not a bad start. But if you're not comparing exact apples to apples, you know, was the same number of days on hole? Was it the same pump rate the whole time? Did you use the same drilling fluid? And even if you do everything exactly the same, sometimes if you're, you know, a quarter mile away, the geology's changed and you're going to have a different hole size. So while that's not a terrible start, there's other things that need to be done. And then a lot of times people will pump their own fluid caliper in the field. You know, I've heard of all kinds of things. They pump nut plug, dye, paint, cottonseed holes, glitter, whatever they can find to pump down hole. All of this, it just adds unnecessary risk. It's just not necessary. Go ahead. So there are many solutions to coming up with a good volume, right? You can run wire lines, you can do other things, but sometimes it's not economically viable, or the wellbore conditions don't allow you to run a wire line, or whatever the case may be. But another tool that an engineer can use in their engineering toolbox is to run a fluid caliper with a third-party company. I like to say it's more of a proper fluid caliper. A proper fluid caliper is going to use the laws of fluid dynamics to accurately calculate the volume of the hole. Now, to do that, you need a neutrally buoyant marker, and we'll get into that here in just a second on a couple more slides. There's also a lot of attention to detail. Whenever you have something going down hole and circulating around, all kinds of different things can happen that will affect how that marker will flow back. And if you don't have proper training, processes, and procedures in place to figure out all those things and to document them, you're going to have bad data at the beginning. And if you have bad data, it doesn't matter how good your calculations are, you're never going to get a good output. So, you know, bad data in, bad data out, right? So having a third party that has this attention to detail and all these things will help increase your accuracy and reduce the risk. Go ahead. So how do you run a fluid caliper? One of the most important things is to install a flow meter on the discharge end of your mud pump. Go ahead, Kirk. These are going to go quick here. That flow meter will have a totalizer that will give you the exact pump output. Now, this is important to know the exact pump output, because if you don't have that, you're just assuming 93 to 95% efficient. And that's not always the case, especially lately. A lot of these rigs that have been in the yard for the last few years are coming out and they are just not running very efficient. So again, if you have bad data with a pump rate assumption, then you're going to have bad data coming out. So putting in a flow meter is very important. Go ahead. So you put your marker into the drilling fluid system. Usually we just drop it down the drill pipe. That's generally the easiest way, but there's other ways depending on how the rig plumbing is set up. Go ahead. So what we're dropping is whole oats. And the reason we use whole oats, like I said before, it is neutrally buoyant. So an oat, and these are the same thing you would feed a horse, right? We paint them so that we can see them, but we use them because they absorb whatever drilling fluid system you have, whether it's freshwater, brine water, oil-based mud, gel, doesn't matter. It absorbs it and becomes the same density. So it becomes part of the fluid regime. If you use some of those other markers that I mentioned earlier, nut plug, glitter, dye, all that stuff, they're either more or less dense. So they're going to float or they're going to sink a little bit as they circulate back around. You're not going to get a true circulation time Now, there's nothing proprietary here or secret here, but we've tried a lot of things over the years, and having a neutrally buoyant marker is just very key to getting an accurate circulation time. Okay. So we've now dropped the marker down the drill pipe. It has come out the bit and it is circulating back up the annulus. Go ahead. And we're going to sample returns generally at the rig shakers, but wherever is the safest and most reasonable place. Sometimes it's out at the pits, sometimes it's in the cellar, but generally speaking, we're going to catch it over the rig shakers or in the possum belly. Next slide. So the marker that we have put in has been traveling at the apex of the flow curve, laminar flow curve, over the total annulus. So this is where the concepts of fluid dynamics come in. So that flow curve is going to be steeper or more blunt, depending on many factors: the hole size, the pump volume, the viscosity of the fluid, and several other things. And if you don't know how to properly account for that, then you're going to have a volume that's either way too high or way too low. So by properly accounting for this flow curve, we're able to get our volumes plus or minus 10% of actual hole volume in most cases. So it's very important to understand those calculations. I think that is the last slide, isn't it, Kirk? I apologize, I'm not as good as you reading the comments. If there was anyone in particular I could address, or we could talk about it in the Q&A.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And but definitely, I did see some questions or some thoughts there. So hang around for the Q&A and we can, we'll dive into it there.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kirk.
Okay. Thank you. It really caught it's caught my attention many times, as far as sometimes we don't know. I mean, it catches my attention when I'm on the rig and I know we didn't get cement back in and we report that we did, but often we're not looking with post job with the bond log, we're not looking for tops of cements. And when we go back and we've been using a percentage and we go back for whatever reason, we have to log a well and we see that it's not where we thought it was. I just see a lot of advantage in applying fluid calipers when drilling key wells. So I